Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me and for all the work that's come here. I want to first just start with a few takeaways, and if you have any questions, please ask my colleagues here. Some of the ideas I'm talking about were recently published in the California Management Review out of Berkeley, and the article was selected for the cover, so there's a balancing act of work and life. We think about it as an individual issue, and when we love work-life balance for ourselves, but not so much for other people. And I want you to switch your mind here to think about it as an organizational behavior and strategic issue that is an economic issue. If you look at the labor market participation in Korea of women, that infertility rates, and the idea of using your human capital, if we do not redesign the workplace to have men and women not stressed and overwork, which is a big part of another challenge in cultures, you will not have a healthy, long-term, sustainable workforce. And so it is part of new ways of working, and I hope that I will give you some food for thought today. So I'm going to talk about the idea of balanced workplace flexibility. And a lot of times we think about work-life benefits, and I've been doing this work for a long time, but it's finally become a very hot issue, and I counted up, and I believe I've been invited to like 13 countries, including Singapore had me over about 5 years ago as an economic issue to add value to the economy. We think about workplace flexibility as an individual benefit or an accommodation. So you might ask me, can I work from home tomorrow? And I'll say maybe yes or no if I'm the boss. I don't want you to think that way anymore about it. A key takeaway is I would like you to think about it as a business process, a way of working. So we know that 15 or 20 years ago, IBM, for example, in the US went to a mobile workforce for many of their employees, and they had people working from their home in terms of business consulting. That may not work everywhere, but they saved millions of dollars in real estate costs. They also had people actually work as much or longer because they weren't having commuting time, and they increased employee retention and reduced turnover. Today, younger, more nimble companies are looking at ways to engage people, and some are burning people out, albeit in the Silicon Valley, but others are really having the best talent come to them because they are a cool place to work, and people see that they can have a life and also be effective. So we're going to talk about who benefits, give you a case example of how to do it, and here's why this is such a competitive issue. So we all know that we have an aging workforce problem nationwide or internationally here. And one thing I learned just reading in the paper here in Korea is the Sampo generation, S-A-M-P-O, giving up marriage, dreams, or even buying a house. And there was also a study that was done in Korea about beliefs about who was responsible for the division of labor. And if you were a baby boomer, somebody born in the 40s or 50s, you felt it was the wife's duty, 60% of the people they surveyed here in Korea, to take care of the home, even if she was working. But for many of you, and you're all millennials pretty much, except for the front row here, I'm just kidding, in the room, if you are in your 20s or 30s, 60% of the people surveyed said it should be shared between the man and the woman. So flexibility is not a woman's issue. That's a takeaway as well. It is a people issue. It is the redesign of what's happening to the workforce, a new way of working. We have problems of dropping fertility rates. If you do not replace your workforce, you will not be economically competitive. If you don't have enough people working, it used to be we had like a pyramid. So you had lots of young people working at the bottom, and then that would support the aging workforce above. Now we have an inverted triangle. So we have far fewer younger workers working, paying into Social Security and pensions. That's a long-term economic problem as well. So we also have a global work schedule. You know, the time zones don't just operate here on Korean time. So flexibility could actually have your business be more effective for customers. A study was done with C-suite executives, and they asked, what was the #1 challenge that you faced for 2020? It said, believe it or not, and these weren't all HR people, they said attracting and rewarding the best people. And they said the #1 tactic to keep people at your organization was workplace flexibility. And this is flexibility that's not layoffs or having people work horrible schedules. This is flexibility that gives people control over when, where, or how they work. So this is a survey that's done, and really the important thing to remember is the column that has job challenge, supervisor task support, climate of respect, autonomy, economic survey, work-life fit. If you've worked for a big company, many of them do employee opinion surveys. I don't know if any of you have ever taken an employee opinion survey. My boss gives me feedback if I need it. I get the support I need on the job. I feel that I can control how I work. In the old days, those first 5 items, job challenge down to economic security, I make enough money to be able to pay for my expenses, those were the main job characteristics. Today, work-life fit is as core or important to workers as these other attributes. So you better be thinking about how to redesign work to support work-life fit. So flexible work schedules, what are they? Worker control over time, workload, and place. And they're offered by employers for both work-life and performance reasons. In the US, 77% of employers allowed at least some workers to change the time that they start and stop work. And yesterday we were at Samsung, and they do have flex time, albeit limited, even at companies like Samsung, and they're trying to experiment with others as well. And there's also been, since I believe 2008 or 7, a family-friendly index that has been started here in Korea. And we just met with the Minister of Gender Equality, and she is going to do all she can to try and spread this in Korea as a means of economic competitiveness. We also spoke with the Labor and Employment Minister yesterday, and he's doing a survey of 4 million people on work-life issues. So what, like it or not, it is part of the new equation of figuring out how do we adapt organizations, because organizations take a long time to change in terms of values and assumptions about what is productivity and how do we work together. Another new trend, and I know you have very small houses if you live in the city in an apartment, but 63% of people in the States or companies allow at least some employees to work at home occasionally. Think about it, you can work at home and you don't have to take the whole day off if you have to go to the doctor. It seems very basic, but it's really a new aspect of productivity and thinking about how do we redesign work. You could allow people to work at smart work centers, which is a trend here in Korea. So the benefits of workplace flexibility, the first one is just the organization. So just focus on the colored side. That really, the studies show if you have flexibility, you will get the best workers. There's also cost savings, and I'm going to give you a case study about a bank called Northern Trust. That's a global bank that has offices in Singapore, Chicago, and London, and how they migrated teams that were financial traders and looked at how that this saved lots and lots of money and also increased retention of workers. There's also the idea of decreased presenteeism. Have you all heard of the word presenteeism? It's the idea that when you're at your desk and people think you're working, but you're really surfing the internet and looking at Facebook. And so what we want is to have people when they're at work feel like they're really fully there. And then if you can allow people to have work-life boundaries and actually be able to not have to be and checking email at night on your smartphone, that would be a new norm. That is another form of informal flexibility. People are also more likely to be engaged at work and less likely to miss work or come to work when they're sick if you allow people to use flexibility and not be viewed as slackers. And lastly, we all care about our communities, and we don't even have time to exercise. I actually asked at Samsung if people are using their exercise center during the lunchtime, and they said, oh, not so much. So if you have all these policies or great facilities, but nobody's using them for well-being, not very effective. So in some cases, the way companies have implemented flexibility has been a problem. And basically, in the US, some companies like Yahoo and Best Buy started to pull back on these policies when they were having bad economic times. But really, it involves the takeaway of thinking about how do you manage performance, how do you redesign work, and how do you make sure you pick the right people that don't work too much or really maybe shouldn't be the people that should be managing flexibility. It's something that has to be how the work team implements. And I'll give you an example in a moment, but the basic idea is you'll have to do like any workplace change, look and see if this is a fit for the type of business process we're doing, and how do we implement flexibility as an organization change that this is just how our team works. What's the kind of alignment of performance, selection, pay, leadership systems, and the culture that we need to create a high-performance work team where people control where and when they work, and people are trusted by management. So balanced flexibility is mutually beneficial for workers and management. It's win-win. People agree on where, when, and how work is done. It can be a formal policy, but as important is informal trust. Say you need to work at home at one day, or you need to come in late, or you just need to have less work because you're going to school and you can't do the job that you did before, so cut back a little bit on workload. And it's really adapting business as a team process. What happens right now is many companies put in flexibility and they have a culture of imbalanced flexibility. So there are three traps. The first trap is unintended consequences. So say we put in workplace flexibility and you guys here get to telework whatever you want on this side of the room, and you guys over here don't get to telework. So who's happy? Are you guys very happy? Probably not. You're probably a little mad at these guys. And here's management in the middle, and they're thinking, maybe these people aren't working. How do I know if they're working? So you have some unintended consequences in figuring out how to make flexibility work. And sometimes what happens, the studies show when people start using telework, it's called electronic tethering or job creep. So people have trouble shutting work off. They're working on the weekends, they're working during vacations, they're working at night. So you have to come up with new rules for how people work together. Then, a second unintended consequence is altered work-life dynamics. And here is some of this idea that people have trouble transitioning from work to non-work. Have you ever been at home and taken an email from work when you were trying to relax or school, and it kind of upset you, and then you went and talked to your partner and said, what, and you took that negative mood into your home? Or if you're at work and you're trying to focus on work and something from personal life, you check also a text. Part of the problem is with this new world of no boundaries is we have to come up with ways that people can self-manage this idea of job and family creep between work and non-work. So if you put in workplace flexibility, people need to sort of be trained to psychologically manage when they're on and off work. And lastly, we want to talk about fairness and inequality and thinking about coming up with ways that people don't feel that if they use a flexible program or that they are going to be losing their job or not promoted. So what happens here in Korea and in many countries, there's workplace flexibility policies, but career-oriented employees do not use them because they think they will be passed over for promotion. So here's the types of examples. We don't have time to go through all of them, but I want you to take away this takeaway, that whatever type you put in, whether it's time schedules changes, which would be like flex time, compressed work weeks where people work perhaps instead of 5 days a week and 40 hours a day, you might work 9 days a week and work 80 hours over 9 days instead of 10 days. That's a compressed work week, and it's great because you have a 3-day work weekend every other week. Even hourly workers can trade shifts and innovation. Those are examples of time flexibility. Location flexibility is telework, being able to do remote work or hoteling, or even work from vacation just in the morning and then be able to be off 2 weeks because you had took one work call. Job sharing, or as a way of addressing workloads. A big trend is reduced load work, where you let people, say near retirement or after they've had a baby, work maybe 70% and take a 30% pay cut for a few months. Those are all examples of flexibility in when, where, and how much people work, or leaves if people have maternity leave or paternity leave or education. Every type of these flexibility types requires a different business process, a different way of thinking about how does the team interact, how do we measure performance, how do we coordinate meetings, how do we really redesign work? And that's the problem with flexibility in the past. Companies have adopted programs but haven't redesigned the rest of the organization as an org change. So for a moment, if you could just think for yourself, and I'm going to have a contest, and I want this side of the room to think that you are the employer that has just decided to put in telework. And I want you to think about what would be a pro or a benefit for the employer of telework, and what would be a drawback. And I want this middle group to think about, for the employee, what would be a benefit of telework if you were going to adopt it, and what would be a drawback. And you guys, I want you to think about what might be the conflict or the way to balance between worker and management. And if we had more time, I would let you chat for a minute. But let's just a smart group of people. What might happen? What would be a benefit of telework for the employer? Can you think of any benefit? Anybody here? Don't be shy. Anyone? Sorry?
Real estate cost down. Office
Real estate goes down. A+. Any other benefit for an employer? Telework. Tell me. Oh, retirement? Because people are still working? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not so sure about that one, but still very good. There are some others, but one more chance? How about less commuting time? That could be an employee benefit. All right. What about employee? What's a benefit for employees of telework? Can you think? You're not going to let this side beat you. Come on. Anyone?
Work-family balance.
Better work-family balance, maybe, because you could be at home, say if your children got home from school or whatever. What's another one? Another benefit for employees of telework? Or downside?
Interruption, downside.
Yeah, your kids are there. You can't work at home. And the same for the employer. A downside might be you're not sure people are working. What might be a balancing act between employer and employee? And that's, what do you think for telework? Any ideas? Employee, employer, what might be something that they'd have to work out?
Well, I think they have to monitor employees' opportunistic behaviors because they're physically distanced with one another.
So the company would not be sure, they're distant. How do we measure performance? How do we communicate? How do we set up meetings? So you get the idea. For any type of flexibility or any business process, you would have to think about what is the employee role, good and bad? What is the employer role, good and bad? How do we marry them and balance. It's just common sense. And so the benefits of home working or telework, or it reduces commuting time, it reduces real estate costs, you don't have to buy fancy suits, you can attract and retain talent. The downside is you have to figure out how do we now communicate. I don't want to send 20 emails to set up a meeting. You have to figure out when people are on and off. And not everybody's cut to work at home, so you have to select the right people. You have to figure out how to manage performance. Some people can get isolated, and not everything can be taken off-site. But you know what? The Work Smart case at Northern Trust, they migrated whole work teams because real estate prices were very expensive in Chicago. And basically, they were able to figure out how to save on commuting expenses, how to reduce commuting time, and how to increase work-life balance. And the company found that they spent $200 million annually on occupancy expenses. They were in Chicago, the employee population was growing, and they've spread this all over the world. The company buildings were at capacity, and they found that 1 in 8 of their staff were using a VPN daily, but at any given time, only 50% of their desks were occupied, and every vacant desk in the corporate headquarters was costing the company $7,000 a year. This was a very conservative and traditional company, and it had extremely high levels of customer service, and face time was perceived as the only way to be productive. But what they did, like any business change, they had a pilot, they did risk management. These were traders. Could we take this work off-site? They migrated whole work teams, and they did a productivity assessment. And what they did is participants had to agree to give up their office space in exchange for having a home office. And then they used a hotel unit in the office. And it was a voluntary program by business unit where they did analysis. And participants had to clear their personal belongings from the workstations, but they worked 1 day a week at home, 1 day a week in the office, and the employees could choose how much they wanted to work in between. And they did a charter, and the team said, here's how we're gonna work together. And they did a risk analysis. Could this job be taken off-site? They also made sure that people had the right equipment at home for technology. The manager had to agree, and overtime wasn't eligible. People had to say, I have a separate door. Believe it or not, one criteria for home office is you must have a separate door for office space. There's been studies on that. And they said, we're gonna not reimburse anything other than laptops. The laptops had a smartphone in it, so it was a soft phone, and they measured over 90 days how these work teams did, and did bi-weekly surveys. And after the 90 days, they did another milestone. And the bottom line is productivity went up, absenteeism went down, job satisfaction went up, and actually engagement went up, work-life balance went up. It was a wild success that they've migrated it worldwide. So like any business change, this is how people in Korea and worldwide should be implementing flexibility. What type of flex fits the team? What is the manager and employee role? How do we communicate differently? How do we adapt work processes? How do we ensure security, client outcomes? How do we measure our HR systems? And what are our performance metrics? And how do we build equity and trust? It sounds hard, but it's just like any continuous improvement process of new ways of working. So I hope that you'll think about work-life differently as a result of this talk. It's not a program, it's a business process, it's an org change. It benefits the employee, it benefits the employer, it benefits customers because you can have coverage 24/7. And we all know for work-life balance, we can't just choose between holidays and work as our only form of work life. We have families, we have friends, we have our exercise, vacations, we have to sleep. This is the way the world is today, and this is part of employee empowerment. So thank you very much and have a great conference.